Okay guys, well, I apologize if this video gets off on the audio. I've been working on this the last 3 hours and I don't know what happened, but somehow my audio keeps getting off on my video. So hopefully it'll work. If it doesn't, I apologize. If it does, awesome, but maybe it'll get fixed on the next one if it does. But honestly, I'm tired of working on it, and it's you can listen to it regardless. Okay, so welcome to the second YouTube review video. This is over Chapter 1, Part 1, and we'll do a little bit of look ahead to the rest of Chapter 1 and hopefully get you guys a little bit ahead of the curve. Now, once again, we are in my awesomely decorated office. Look at that. Woohoo! Oh, look at the dragon back there. Yay. And my awesome AC t-shirt once again, because I don't know. It's awesome. It is newly washed, so that's cool. Okay, anyway, so we talked about matter. We talked about physical, chemical changes, that type of stuff. Whenever we went over Chapter 1. That's more vocab stuff. That is stuff that you guys need to know. You need to know how to apply the definitions of chemical and physical changes, intensive, extensive properties, that type of stuff. Those are things I expect you to have down by the time you come into class next week. Remember, physical changes, changes or properties that do not change the actual molecular formula of our substance, whereas chemical changes, anytime we undergo a chemical reaction, that's going to be a chemical change. Now, the very last part of last week, we went over significant figures, and not to be horribly punny, but it is one of the more significant things in Chapter 1. Now, the only part we got to is talking about how to count significant figures. So I'm just going to briefly go over that. And then I've got a couple more little videos on examples, and then adding and subtracting significant figures for there at the end. So, for counting significant figures. First, why do we do them? We talked about that in class. But the reason we care about significant figures is because every time we make a measurement in science, and science is all about measurements, our instrument can only be so precise. So whenever we're writing numbers, we have to be sure that the reader knows which digit is estimated, which is just a placeholder, etc., etc. So, the rules for counting significant figures are very simple. We have first rule, all non-zero numbers are significant. All non-zero, not a zero, it is significant. Okay. Leading zeros, okay, that are zeros that come before the first non-zero number. So if we have a bunch of numbers here and we have a zero, zeros before it, or I guess for you guys it'd be this way. We have a bunch of zeros that go this way that are before our number. Those are called leading zeros, and they are never ever significant. Okay. So leading zeros not significant. Trapped zeros, those are zeros between two non-zero numbers. So if we have two non-zero numbers and we've got a zero in between, or 50 zeros in between, doesn't matter. They're all significant. So trapped zeros are significant, leading zeros not significant, and then trailing zeros, zeros that are coming at the end of the number, those are going to be not going to be significant unless there's a decimal place in your number. Okay, so let me say that again. Trailing zeros are not significant unless there's a decimal place anywhere in your number. Okay, so it's something to keep in mind. So now let's go over a brief review on how to count significant figures. We're going to do a couple examples of that. We're going to do adding and subtracting, and then multiplying and dividing, and then we'll wrap up with just a quick word. Okay. Okay. So we talked about the rules for counting significant figures. Okay, we went over how to do it and why we do it, and we kind of already talked about it in the class, but wanted to go back over it again in the video. So now that we talked about the rules, let's go over some examples. So we've got a number, 0.001010. Okay, right there on the screen, we can see that number, and so we can apply the rules that we just went over to this number. Now the first rule was that all non-zero numbers are significant. So we've got a 1 there and a 1 there, and so we count both of those. Okay, trapped zeros are always significant. So the zero in between the two ones counts. Leading zeros are never significant, no matter if they're before or after the decimal. Leading zeros are never significant, so those do not count. Trailing zeros count only if there's a decimal place anywhere in the number. So these zeros count because there's a decimal place there. So that gives us 5 significant figures in that number. Now, here's another number, 101,000. Just like before, we can go through the rules, kind of see what zeros count, which ones don't. The only zero that counts here is the one that's trapped in between the ones, so this number has 3 significant figures. Here's another number, 100,100. The only zeros that count are the two between the two ones, because leading zeros never count. Trailing zeros don't count unless there is a decimal. So this has 4 significant figures. Now this number is still 100,100, okay? It doesn't get simplified down to 1,001 or anything crazy like that. Okay, it's still 100,100. Those last 2 zeros are just placeholders. They just tell us the quantity that's over here. Okay, so whenever you're rounding or something like that, don't lop those back 2 zeros off. Don't lop these off. Just leave it as 100,100 with 4 significant figures. The last number is 50,000. We know that 50,000 has 1 significant figure right there, the 5. Now, what happens if our instrument is more precise than that? What happens if our instrument measures 3 significant figures? We just happen to have a value that's 0. Well, I talked about it in the class, but let's go back over it. The way that we make those zeros significant is to put this into scientific notation. So now we've got 5.00 times 10 to the 4. Now these two numbers are the exact same whenever they're expanded, but this number now has 3 significant figures instead of just 1. Okay, so that's really handy whenever you're doing the lab or something else and you need a 0 to be significant. We just put it in scientific notation. So we talked about counting significant figures, and that's the end of the review for the first class. 4 significant figures. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about adding and subtracting and multiplying and dividing with significant figures, so you guys have a little bit of a heads up and kind of a head start on next week's lecture. Now, when adding or subtracting significant figures, we have a rule. Okay? We're going to use the same number of decimal places or digit places as the measurement with the fewest decimal places. Okay? And then we're going to round our answer to match it. So quick example. Here we have 25.2 plus 1.34. Now notice 25.2 has 1 decimal place. The 2 is in the tenths place. And we have 1.34 where its last decimal place is in the hundredths place. So it has 2 decimal places. The way I say this is it is the farthest to the right, the significant figure that's farthest to the right. So if we notice 25.2, its last significant figure, and the one farthest to the right is the 2. And in 1.34, its last significant figure, the one farthest to the right, is the 4. Okay? So when we put this in the calculator, we get 26.54 out. Now we have to round it. We have to round it to match the one with the fewest decimal places. And so whenever we round that answer, we get 26.5. Okay, notice that if it's 4 or less, we round down. If it was 5 or more, we would round up. Now here's how I write it. Okay, here we have a math problem. 212.1 plus 4.32 plus 16.0. Notice how I line them all up based on their decimal place. This can be really handy whenever we go to round. Now if we look at each number individually, our first one has a number in the tenths place. The second one has its last significant digit in the hundredths place. And then the third number has its last significant digit in the tenths place as well. And so the number with the fewest amount of decimal places is both 212.1 and 16.0. Notice that 212.1 has 4 significant figures and 16.0 has 3. So whenever we're adding and subtracting, we're not worried about how many significant figures each number has, only where their decimal place is. Okay? So now, instead of just going ahead and adding this up, I put a line. Okay? And this line is right after the tens place. Okay? And that tells me that, okay, when I get my answer, I'm going to have to round this to the tens place. Whenever we put this in the calculator, we get 232.42. And notice how I extended my line to intersect my answer. Now it's really easy to say, okay, we keep everything to the left of the line, and we get rid of everything to the right. So whenever I round this off, my answer is going to be 230. Okay, the last topic that we have before calling it a day today is multiplying and dividing with significant figures. This is the easiest one there is. Okay, whenever we multiply and divide with significant figures with regards to significant digits, we just use whichever number in the problem has the fewest significant figures. Okay, it's super easy. And then we round our answer off to that number of significant figures. Okay, so here's an example. We have 110.5 times 0.048. Notice that 110.5 has 4 significant figures, and 0.048 has 2 significant figures. So the 0.048 has the fewest number of significant figures. And so we're going to round our answer to match it. Now when we put this in the calculator, we get 5.304. Okay, so when we round this off, we keep the first 2 significant figures, and then we're going to round that to 5.3. Okay, so this has 2 significant figures here. We're going to round our calculator answer off to 2 significant figures by keeping only the first 2. Okay, and whenever we do that, we get 5.3. And so again, if it's 4 or less, we're going to round down. 5 or more, we're going to round up. Now, here's another example that I did. So we have our big problem. 310 times 5,414 times 93 times 20. I can't do that in my head. Congratulations if you can. But we do know some things about the problem. If we're doing this calculation with regards to the significant figures, we can go ahead and look at how many there are in each number. 310 has 2 significant figures. 5,414 has 4. 93 has 2, and 20 has 1. And so we know that our answer is supposed to have only 1 significant figure. And so if you're on a test and you don't have a calculator, or you broke it, or you threw it across the room, whatever it is, and you're looking at your multiple choice answers and you see all of them have different numbers, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 significant figures, and then your last one, your A, B, C, or D, has 1 significant figure, you know that's going to be the answer. So in looking at these problems, you don't actually have to do the math. Just figure out how many significant figures your answer is supposed to have, and that's probably going to be the multiple choice answer that you're going to choose. Now, if the answer is not multiple choice, or if the question is not multiple choice, well, you're going to have to do the math. So doing the math, we shove this into the calculator, and we get this horrendous number out. Okay? 3, 1, 2, 1, 7, 12, 400. Okay, so 3 trillion with a bunch of numbers after it. Now, we know that we had 1 significant figure from the 20. And so we're going to round this off by keeping only the first significant figure. And so we're going to round off everything to the right of that to 0. Okay, since this is 1, we're going to round this down to 3 trillion. Okay. It's not 3, it's 3 trillion. Okay? We can also write that as 3 times 10 to the 9. So that's it for the second YouTube review video. Hopefully it looks alright. I don't know, because I won't see it until it's all cut together, and I'm not doing it again. Anyway, so hopefully it gets some questions answered. If not, leave some comments or questions in the comment section below. And then don't forget, we have a reading quiz over Chapter 1. Remember, we moved it forward. Reading quiz over Chapter 1 next week, Tuesday or Wednesday, depending on what class you are on, because we have Monday, which is a Labor Day holiday type thing. And then we're going to start on Chapter 2. So this next video will be total review for Chapter 1 and starting Chapter 2. The next video will be. Anyway, once again, questions, leave them there, and I'll see you guys next week.